Welcome to It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach, providing information and support while encouraging hope and faith, with your host, Sister A. Legree. You can find out more about us by logging on to our website at igbattmho.org. And I'm just getting set up here. Current slide. Again, this is It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach, providing information and support while encouraging hope and faith. You can find out more about us by logging on to our website at igbatt.com. Again, you can also email us there. You can also write us. Post Office Box 7432, Silver Spring, Maryland 20910. Email igbatt1@aol.com or support@igbattmho.org. Again, this is It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach. Welcome. Providing information and support while encouraging hope and faith to individuals who are living with the symptoms of a severe and persistent mental illness or life situation. Today I wanted to talk about positive and negative symptoms associated with schizophrenia. The positive and negative symptoms associated with the diagnosis of schizophrenia. Okay, so let me first start by starting with what is psychosis. We hear that term a lot. Many of us hear that term a lot, especially when it's on the news, or you may hear someone, an official or someone will say, this person is psychotic, or this person is, was in a psychotic rage, or whatever the case is. So keep in mind, I want to just share some things with you. Psychosis is a condition in which a person has lost some contact with reality. So when you say a person is psychotic, what you should be saying or should mean is that this person has lost contact with reality. The person may have severe disturbances in thinking, emotion, and behavior. And like we shared before, when we look at mental health symptoms, again, on this broadcast, we talk about mental health symptoms. We're not necessarily talking about emotional healing and emotional, because that's a little different. We're talking about brain illnesses that we're talking about here. Of course, brain illnesses can affect the way we think, the way we behave, and our emotions, but what we're talking about here are brain illnesses, okay? We're talking about medical conditions. The person may have a severe disturbance in thinking, emotion, and behavior. Disorders in which psychosis can occur are not as common as depression and anxiety. I may have mentioned it before if you've been watching me. When we look at the most prevalent is depression and anxiety. Psychosis usually occurs in episodes. So a person may be psychotic today and may not be psychotic tomorrow. It's not necessarily constant or a static condition. Now, how do you know just some symptoms when psychosis is developing? As I was sharing, well, for many people, this is the first time you're seeing me, but when you're looking at mental illnesses, thought, feelings, and behavior, the key word is change. When you see a change, whether it's too little, too much, there's a change. Too much sleeping, too little sleep, too much eating, not enough eating, is a change in a person's behavior. So when we look at changes in emotion and motivation, and when you look at common symptoms when psychosis is developing, we're looking at depression, which is a change. We're looking at anxiety, irritability, suspiciousness, blunt, flat, or inappropriate emotion, change in appetite, reduced energy and motivation. What I'm doing now is talking about some of the common symptoms when psychosis is developing. When a person's becoming out of touch with reality, you're going to start seeing certain signs and symptoms. Some of the signs and symptoms or behaviors that you will see, when you look, the person may become more depressed. They may become even more anxious, irritability, suspicious, Now keep in mind, depression is a mental disorder, can be a mental disorder on its own. Anxiety is also a mental disorder on its own. But today, right now, I'm talking about psychosis. When a person is becoming out of touch with reality, some of the things that you may see. So you may see this person becoming more depressed. You may see some anxiety. You may see some irritability. You may see some changes in appetite. You may see a reduction in their energy or motivation. Now, there are certain disorders where psychosis is more prevalent. So psychosis may occur. Psychosis itself is not a standalone illness. Psychosis just means being out of touch with reality. There are certain signs and symptoms, behaviors that you'll see as a person goes from being in touch with reality to out of touch with reality, in and out. In the middle, there are certain things that you'll see. You may see depression. You may see anxiety. You may see more irritability. You may see more changes in their emotions, right? As a person is becoming more out of touch with reality. Now, there are certain disorders in which psychosis, being out of touch with reality, is a symptom. Those include schizophrenia, bipolar, then there's psychotic depression, there's schizoaffective disorder, and drug-induced psychosis. So you will see it. In some cases, a person becomes out of touch with reality as a result of drugs that they've been using. The thing with that is once the drug is out of the system, they usually go back to how they were before. So the types of disorders in which psychosis may occur: schizophrenia, you can see it in bipolar, you may see it in psychotic depression, you'll see it in schizoaffective disorders or drug-induced psychosis, okay? So again, psychosis is a mental health condition that causes people to perceive or interpret things differently from those around them. Hallucinations, delusions, is not a condition in itself, but is a symptom or is triggered by other disorders such as schizophrenia, and I'm going to go more with that. We know what causes psychosis, what causes a psychotic disorder. From the research, it's unclear, but there are three main thoughts. There's psychological, sometimes it's a general medical issue, condition, or substance use disorder. When we talk about psychological, we're looking at things like I said before: schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, severe depression. You can see a lack of sleep, insomnia, severe stress or anxiety. Okay, and then the type of episode depends on the cause. So if it's a bipolar, it could be, you can see more maybe a grandeur person. A person may think they're the Queen of England. With schizophrenia, you see more paranoid delusions. So it's important to keep in mind, it causes people, when a person's out of touch with reality, psychosis, it's a mental health condition that causes people to perceive or interpret things differently from those around them. So whenever you begin to interpret or see things differently from from people around you because of what's going on in your head, you're going to behave a certain way. Just think about it. If you everything you looked at, if you thought the TV was talking to you, you're going to automatically withdraw. You may feel more, may become more aggressive or maybe more assertive because of the fear of kind of what's going on with you. And then, of course, with psychosis, you do have some general medical conditions that can cause a person to have a psychotic episode, meaning being out of touch with reality. And I listed a couple here. Brain diseases such as Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease, brain tumor cysts, dementia, AIDS, syphilis in the later stages, some types of epilepsy, stroke. So again, there are some reasons why a person can be psychotic, going through a psychotic episode, meaning they're out of touch with reality. It can be the schizophrenia or mental health, or it can be a medical condition, as I mentioned here, like Parkinson's disease, dementia, HIV, syphilis, stroke, or again, it could be substance abuse. When we look at common symptoms when a person is going from reality to being out of touch with reality, as I mentioned before, you're going to start seeing some changes in that behavior. So you're going to start seeing some changes in thinking and emotion. So the person may start having difficulty with concentration or attention. Their sense of alteration of others, how they see others, will begin to change, right? They'll have unusual perceptual experiences. They may see different light, so they may hear things differently. You're going to see changes in behavior. Also, they may start having odd ideas, strange ideas, right? You're going to start seeing changes in behavior, sleep disturbances, social isolation, reduced ability to carry out daily activities. Again, you're going to start seeing a change. Now, there are certain stages when a person is becoming psychotic, right? You start seeing these different changes, but a person goes from being well to becoming unwell, right? So you have the unwell is the acute stage. That's when you see a person is actively psychotic symptoms. They're actually hallucinating. They're actually really thinking things. Their behaviors actually change. This is usually where people first start noticing. But I want to point out the fact that there's a period where a person goes from being well to unwell. And if we can intercede in the middle, we can keep a person from becoming unwell. We can keep a person from needing maybe to go into the hospital for several days. We can keep a person from from us having to call the police, and the police are being involved. Usually when the police get involved is when a person is in an acute active psychotic stage, right? But before they got there were signs and symptoms along the way. So that's important to remember. So as I mentioned with schizophrenia, so what I'm going to do, I wanted to spend some time with talking about positive and negative symptoms. That's all I'm going to talk about on this broadcast when we talk about schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a severe and persistent mental illness. It's lifelong. A person may be better at sometimes, not better at others. Some of the causes, it can be genetics, it can be environmental. We do see some research there. Certain risk factors, if you have a close relative, it can be drug use. There are a lot of different things here. But one of the symptoms of schizophrenia is when we talk about positive, there are different symptoms. And I want to talk about positive symptoms and negative symptoms here, okay? Positive symptoms, when you think about what's positive about negative, the way I try to remember it is when you take a look at you as an individual, what are some of the regular emotions or behaviors that you would have, right? And then think about those. Think about what you would have, and then think about a plus sign, adding more to it. So when you talk about positive symptoms, are additional behaviors not generally seen in healthy people. So it's additional, it's an add-on behaviors. So example, the first one, we talk about delusions. Delusions has to do with how a person thinks, right? Hallucinations have to do with the emotions. We all have emotions. We all may, you might hear something, you might think something, right? But we're able to manage it. When we talk about positive symptoms, we talk about symptoms that are extra, they're out of control. So when we talk about additional behaviors not generally seen in healthy people, we're looking at delusions, hallucinations, thought disorders, odd, illogical, they can't organize your thoughts, disorganized speech, disorganized behavior. You start seeing changes in the body. Negative symptoms is where you see a person starts talking in a dull voice. You may see the really flat affect. It looks like they talk very little. They don't seem to show any emotions. There seems like a loss of drive. If you're living with the individual, sometimes people would classify them as being lazy when that's really not the case. It's actually a symptom of schizophrenia. But let me talk about schizophrenia a little bit more. Schizophrenia is, like I said, a chronic and severe and disabling brain disorder that has affected people throughout history. About 1% of Americans have this illness. It's not an illness that a lot of people have, right? But it's the type of illness that you hear about most often, because when you look at when you hear the news about or something happened, it's usually someone has a severe and persistent mental illness, and it's poorly treated. People with these disorders may hear voices other people don't hear. They may believe other people are reading their minds, controlling their thoughts, or plotting to harm them, and this can terrify people with the illness and make them withdrawn or extremely agitated. So when you look at a behavior, Right? You want to look at, okay, why is this person acting this way? Because they're acting this way because of what's going on in their head. As I said before, they may hear voices that other people don't hear. They may believe that other people are reading their minds or controlling them or out to get them. So understandably, if you feel that someone is out to get you, you're going to act a certain way, okay? People with schizophrenia may not make sense when they talk. They may sit for hours without moving or talking. Sometimes people with schizophrenia seem fine until they talk about what they are really thinking. So sometimes, you may talk to someone and we're talking and, and you may not realize until we get on a particular topic that their thought pattern, their thought process is not where it should be, okay? Families and society are affected by schizophrenia too. So again, if you're living with someone who's impacted by schizophrenia, the whole family is impacted, right? Normally the brain sorts, interprets, and selects a correct response. A major problem with schizophrenia is a frequent inability to sort, interpret, and respond to thoughts, visual and auditory stimuli, emotions. So normally the brain is able to sort and interpret things that are coming in and come up with the correct response. When you're living with schizophrenia, you have a problem doing that. So you have a problem being able to interpret. Your brain has a problem being able to interpret and sort different things. So things kind of get jumbled up, so to speak. Schizophrenia affects men and women equally. It occurs at similar rates in all ethnic groups around the world. Okay, so it's not that one group gets it more or rich, poor. Schizophrenia can impact anybody, right? Symptoms such as hallucinations and delusions usually start between ages 16 and 30. Men tend to experience symptoms a little earlier than women. Most of the time, people do not get schizophrenia after, let's say, in their 40s or whatever. So let me talk about this. When we talk about any persistent mental illness, many times you're looking at illnesses that started or signs were there when a person was younger, that people just didn't pay attention to or we just kind of ignored. One of the things I talked about before is what something is called a stress vulnerability model. So many times, think about somebody that you know. Maybe, we all know somebody like this. They could be our friend, family, or it could be you, or who I'm talking about. But it could be a loved one, right? And that loved one may be a little, people have different terms, but that loved one, may be a little, we use the terms like slow, we use different terms like something's going on, but you don't know, but it's your loved one and they're okay. Your loved one is fine, right? Because you know your loved one. Everybody's used to the Harold. I'll call him Harold. Everybody's used to Harold. We know that's just the way Harold is. That's just the way, he is, right? And Harold is fine. It's not until Harold gets away, joins the military, goes away to college, or finds a new group that we start noticing, that the new group starts noticing that something is going on with Harold. Because the new group doesn't know Harold. They didn't grow up with Harold. They don't know how he behaves. So when Harold gets into that new group, Harold starts to be experiencing stress. Now, and we said stress is anything that makes a demand on the body, good or bad. So now Harold is away in college. He has to be able to, do sort of, what do you call it? He has to be able to make an outline. He needs to be able to read a schedule. He needs to be able to show up for class on time without someone telling him what to do all the time, right? Because going away to college is new. When you go away to college, you're responsible. You're responsible for getting up on time. You're responsible for making sure that you attend the meetings that you attend, that you're doing your homework. There's no one over your shoulder telling you this is what you need to do. So when he goes away to college and he no longer has those people who are used to him, now he has to do it. Harold is now overwhelmed, and that's when sometimes you start seeing people start having their first psychotic break. Psychotic being out of touch with reality when they go away to school, when they join the military. And what we say, people back home will say, Harold was fine until he went away to the military. Or I don't know, he went to college and they must have given him a drink or they slipped something in his food. And the reality is, Harold was never really okay, but Harold was okay enough because we were used to Harold. It wasn't until he went away to school and the stress. See, Harold always had a vulnerability for a mental illness, and he was fine. But it was not until the stress of going away to college or going away to the military, he began to feel that vulnerability turned into a full-blown psychotic episode, okay? So this is what happens many times with individuals, but when we talk about schizophrenia or any severe and persistent mental illness, you're talking about, a lot of times we've noticed things with kids in junior high school, even as elementary school, you notice things. But there's what we try not to do in the mental health field, you don't really try to give a kid a real heavy diagnosis because it's hard to tell. Sometimes it can be just kid stuff, sometimes, things that adolescents go through, teenagers go through, and it takes a while sometimes to sort things out. But you usually begin to see certain behaviors when a person is, like I said, in high school, you start noticing certain things. And it's not until they get older where they come in contact with the real world that you start beginning to see, maybe something else is going on. But anyway, just wanted to share that. So the symptoms of schizophrenia fall into three broad categories: positive symptoms, negative symptoms, and cognitive symptoms. Positive symptoms, as I said before, are psychotic behaviors not seen in healthy people. These are behaviors that are additional behaviors. People with positive symptoms often lose touch with reality. These symptoms can come and go. Sometimes they are severe, and then other times hardly noticeable, depending on whether the individual is receiving treatment. And what are we talking about positive symptoms? As I mentioned before, and I just want to reiterate, hallucinations. Hallucinations have to do with the senses, right? Are things a person sees, hears, smells, or feels that no one else can see, hear, smell, or feel. So think about our emotions. I think about our senses, our five senses, right? So when you talk about hallucinations, our five senses can be impacted by hallucinations. We can have, sometimes people will feel tactile hallucinations, like something is crawling up their skin, up and down their skin or in their skin. Sometimes they may have a certain smell. These are less common, but sometimes a person may have a certain smell, okay? Or a person may see certain things. Hearing voices are the most common. They may hear certain things, okay? These are hallucinations. As I said, voices are the most common type of hallucinations. Schizophrenia, many people with the disorder hear voices. The voices may talk to the person about his or her behavior, or order the person to do things, or warn the person of danger. Sometimes the voices just talk to each other in the person's head. People with schizophrenia may hear voices for a long time before family and friends notice the problem. So a person could be hearing voices for a long time and they just learn to manage them. They just learn to deal with them. Even with medications. Some people may, the medications, they take them, the voices may go away completely, and sometimes the voices may just become lower, or like to a mumbling voice, right, a mumbling, or a murmur, so to speak. So it varies with the individual. But just know when we talk about hallucinations, we're talking about senses, right? And just think about your five senses. Your five senses can be impacted here. Other times, hallucinations include seeing people or objects that are not there. Like I said, smelling odors that no one else detects, and feeling things like invisible fingers touching your body when no one else is around. Okay. Again, the most common hallucinations is actually auditory. So that tends to be more common. Okay. When we talk about delusions, again, the way I remember it, I've taught it. When you think about M-I-N-D, mind, M-I-N-D, think about M-I-N-D, mind, D, delusions. Delusions has to do with your beliefs, right? Delusions are false beliefs that are not part of the person's culture and do not change. The person believes delusions even after other people prove that the beliefs are not true or logical. People with schizophrenia can have delusions that seem bizarre. Bizarre meaning they're just way out there, such as believing that neighbors can control their behaviors with magnetic waves. They may also believe that people on television are directing special messages to them, or that radio stations are broadcasting their thoughts aloud to others. Sometimes they believe they are someone else, such as a famous historical figure. They may have paranoid delusions and believe that others are trying to harm them, such as by cheating, harassing, poisoning, spying on them, or plotting against them, or that people they care about. These beliefs are called delusions of persecution. Okay? So when we talk about delusions, these has to do with the way a person thinks, right? And like I said, I've seen different things. I know one particular person in particular. His delusion centered around the fact that he was married to this particular person, and despite the fact that they proved that that wasn't the case, right? He still believed that. So when you talk about, which is, you have to see it as a symptom of a disorder, right? When a person gets treatment, then the delusion will subside. Okay, you're not going to be able to prove to the individual by showing them, well, no, this is not true. See, this is not happening. Then they're not going to believe it. No matter what you show them. Okay, you can take the person to the house and say, okay, this is her husband. Okay, you're not married to her. You know, she's never met you. It doesn't matter because there's a delusion in their mind. This is what they believe to be true. Okay, so now when you talk about delusions, it's a symptom of a disorder. The person needs to gets treatment. That's what we're looking at. And then you look at thought disorders. Thought disorders are unusual ways of thinking. One form of thought disorder is called disorganized thinking. This is when a person has trouble organizing his or her thoughts and connecting them logically. They may talk in a garbled way that's hard to understand, meaning they go around in circles. Another form is called thought blocking. This is when a person stops speaking abruptly in the middle of a thought. When asked why she stopped talking, the person may say that it felt as if the thought had been taken out of his or her head. Finally, with a thought disorder, a person might begin to make up words, right? They do this sometimes. And then also you may see movement disorders. It may appear as agitated body movements. A person with a movement disorder may repeat certain motions over and over again. Okay? In the other extreme, a person may become catatonic and they don't move. Catatonia is a state in which a person doesn't move and does not respond to others. It's rare today, but we used to see it a lot. So when we talk about these particular schizophrenia, what I wanted to start by explaining to you what psychosis, being out of touch with reality. We talked about there are certain disorders where you would see psychosis, such as schizophrenia, and then some of the symptoms of schizophrenia. We're looking at delusions or positive symptoms, which include delusions, thought disorders. Then you're looking at movement disorders, okay? Or then I'm going to talk about negative symptoms. Now, as I said before, negative symptoms are associated with disruptions to normal emotions and behaviors. These symptoms are harder to recognize as part of the disorder and can be mistaken for depression or other conditions. These symptoms include a flat affect. A person's face doesn't change. You can tell them, whatever you want to tell them, it's just flat. A lack of pleasure in everyday life. A lack of ability to begin and sustain planned activities. They speak little, even when forced to interact. How are you doing? Fine. So-and-so, so-and-so. They don't say anything. People with negative symptoms need help with everyday tasks because they often neglect personal hygiene because they're just not focused. So when we talk about, and let me say something here. I know people like using that word a lot, schizophrenia. What I'm talking about here, I'm talking about a brain disorder, a mental disorder, a DSM-5 disorder, schizophrenia. I know many people I've heard use the term in a spiritual context to say a person is has a split personality, which is a different disorder, but that's how people use it. People say, oh, that person is schizophrenic. And you talk about a split disorder. Or you may say, I've heard people use the term, so that person has, from a spiritual standpoint, that person is schizophrenic, meaning they are double-minded when it comes to spiritual things, or they're using a lot of, different terms. here, I just want to be clear, when I'm talking about schizophrenia, I'm talking about the mental diagnosis, the brain disorder of schizophrenia. I'm not talking about anything else. So just want to be clear. Because when we talk about schizophrenia, just like diabetes, there are certain signs and symptoms that go along with diabetes, right? There are certain signs and symptoms that go along with hypertension. There are certain signs and symptoms that go along with cancer. There are certain signs and symptoms that go along with a COVID diagnosis, right? There are certain signs and symptoms that go along with schizophrenia, okay? And I'm talking about some of those signs and symptoms. Right now I'm talking about the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. We did talk about the positive symptoms. So again, when you see a person with negative symptoms, you're looking at more of a flat affect. Those are the people, as I said before, that everybody, whether it's positive or negative, there are challenges with it. But one of the challenges with the the negative symptoms is that it's so difficult it can be to deal with. The medications, the psychotic medications, do really, really, really well with positive symptoms, the hallucinations and the delusions, and some of them do okay with negative symptoms. But a lot of times the negative symptoms may still be there to some degree, and that's when people have a challenge with, because that's when people feel like, he's just being lazy, or she just doesn't want to do it, not realizing that this is actually can be a symptom of the disorder. And I'm not saying that you're wrong, because everybody does have a personality. Because just because I'm diagnosed with an illness, whether it's schizophrenia, bipolar, whether it's diabetes or hypertension, I still have a personality, right? So a person living with schizophrenia still has a personality, and they could be, as you could say, oh, they're just lazy, whatever. But many times, sometimes that's not the case. Keep that in mind, that it could be just their negative symptoms. And negative symptoms takes a little longer to deal with. Negative symptoms really need more direction, need more support. I can say it like that. So when we talk about symptoms of schizophrenia, we're looking at delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, disorganized behavior, loss of drive, you just don't feel like doing anything, blunted emotions, social withdrawal. Part of schizophrenia, or positive and negative symptoms, which is what I talked about, and schizophrenia is one of the disorders that you can say it's a psychotic disorder. So when we talk about psychotic disorder, we talk about schizophrenia, bipolar, psychotic depression, schizoaffective depression, or drug-induced psychosis. And when we talk about psychosis, we talk about a person psychotic, we're talking about a person that's being out of touch with reality. Why are they out of touch with reality? They can be out of touch with reality because they living with schizophrenia, or because it's a bipolar disorder, they're going through a drug-induced disorder. You won't know until you actually get the person into treatment. Okay? So again, I just wanted to take a few minutes to start off by talking about psychotic disorders. That's what I want really talk about, positive and negative symptoms of schizophrenia. So you know that there are certain symptoms that are associated with schizophrenia, and that schizophrenia is in fact a brain disorder. People who are living with schizophrenia are able to, their recovery is possible. They are able to live lives. Medications, out of all the disorders, medications is definitely needed. How long a person takes medication really just depends on a lot of other factors. But when we talk about severe and persistent mental illnesses, such as schizophrenia, we are talking about a disorder, a brain illness. I'm not talking about a spiritual illness here. I'm talking about a brain illness where a person has to, should be taking some type of medications. The medication will help the person, will decrease some of these symptoms, and help the person live the life that God has intended for them to live. Now, are there times when a person have a spiritual, can be spiritual, can schizophrenia be spiritual, okay? I'm not going to say that there are times when it can be, but I will say this, is an easy way to figure it out, real simple. If you believe that it's a spiritual issue, and you believe that you are hearing from God, then you should be able to pray and that person should be healed, right? So if you pray and that person is not healed, that illness is still there, then it might be a sign from God letting you know that this is not just spiritual, that there's something else going on here, and that maybe we need to get the person some medical help, right? If a person was bleeding, just bleeding, okay, you saw the blood, what would you do? Oh, you would pray, okay? Of course you would pray. There's nothing wrong with prayer. But would you watch the person, the blood just drain out of the person and let the person die? No, you would get help. So there are a lot of people who are mentally are in that same situation, right? No, it's not the blood, but mentally they're draining. Their senses are draining from them. They're not in the state. They need help, and we don't want to stand by and just say, "Oh well, they should pray." They can't pray. They're not in the situation to pray, right? Once they get to the state where they can pray, pray intelligently, whether through medications and things like that, then you can stand back and say, okay, that's up to them. But people do need help. Again, and I'm just responding to some of the things that I hear, the feedback that I get. And so I want to make sure while I'm being careful to separate it here. As a believer, a follower of Jesus Christ, I do know that there is spiritual impact. There is spiritual aspect that goes along with any disease. Any disease. Well, if you're not feeling well, okay, physically, thoughts, feelings, behaviors, physically, if you're not feeling well, it can impact the way your emotions, and it can also impact you spiritually, okay? So I'll just say that for now, for this particular broadcast. Well, I will say this. I've been in situations where myself, I've prayed for, the Lord had given me a word to give to someone. We prayed for the individual, and I've seen them instantly, okay, healed. I've seen that individual that happen, and you can just see the change in that individual. But I also know that you can pray, and that person can get healed along the way. What do I mean along the way? As they take their medication, as you take your medications, as you talk to your counselor if you need to, talk to a therapist, as you eat right, as you take care of yourself, as you live your life, you can get better, right? And that if you don't get better, let's say you have one of these people who have to take medications, then you're no different than anybody else who has to take medications for hypertension, or who has to take medications for diabetes, or people who had to, when you got COVID and you had to take care of yourself, right? These bodies get sick, things happen. It's just it just happens. Things happen. So don't feel like if you're diagnosed with schizophrenia or you're living with any mental disorder that your faith is any less than someone who's not living with a disorder. Because remember, what the Spirit of God say to the apostle, he said, my grace is sufficient for you, okay? So the thing is, the problem is not the disease, okay? I don't care what the disease is, whether it's HIV, AIDS, hypertension, diabetes, schizophrenia, bipolar. The problem is not that, okay? Okay, because the Holy Spirit will meet you wherever you are. That's not the issue. The issue is that you don't want to allow your negative thoughts and negative behaviors or what people say get you in a situation where you begin to beat yourself up or you begin to feel less than because you're dealing with a particular illness. Because thoughts, feelings, and behavior go together. If you start thinking negative about yourself, you're going to start feeling negative about yourself, and you're going to start behaving certain ways. Jesus Christ has come that you might have life and life more abundantly. It doesn't matter. He's not limited. The Holy Spirit is not limited to your disease. So don't you become limited to it. You don't have to become limited to your schizophrenia. You don't have to be limited by the fact that you're living with depression, just like you don't have to be limited by the fact that you're living with hypertension or diabetes, or that you're in a wheelchair. You may move slower than everybody else, but you can still get there. Again, It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach with your host, Sister Arnetta Legree, providing information and support while encouraging hope and faith. I'll see you next time.